I want to talk about a problem that I've seen often, but to date, I've never heard anyone talk about it. And this is what I call the male version of the devouring mother archetype. It is a common problem in Christian households today. Now, just to say this outright, there is a devouring father archetype, and we're not going to talk about that in this video, although that is worth talking about. We're just keeping it focused on the male version of the devouring mother archetype. So to start, we're going to talk about what that archetype is, the female devouring mother, which is how this is always used. I've never heard anyone talk about the male version of this. But this is a kind of lady who psychologically and emotionally consumes their children. And it's almost always focused on boys, not girls. She does this through, for example, over-nurturing them. She's overly protective, she's smothering, she's possessive. Sometimes we call these people helicopter parents. And that is a primarily female attribute. It's more commonly found in women, and it's spread into fathers just in recent history as males have become far less masculine. And that's a problem I've spoken on before, so I won't delve into that here. But this is a feminine quality, over-nurturing. Devouring mothers, they have a childlike dependence on their children. Their identity as a person, it can't be separated from their kids. And so they excessively orient themselves towards their children. And like so many other things, this is good up to a point. And so we're talking about being beyond the threshold of when it ceases to be good. And they just don't have any identity or activities or personality outside of their kids. They use their kids as an emotional bank. And when they don't feel good about themselves, they just retreat into that. And it causes a lot of problems. They define love in terms of what they get, not what they give. And so how they act towards their children, it's all designed for what they get in return. They do things so that they feel like they're a good mom, so that their kids tell them nice things about them and do nice things for them. Everything's oriented to what they will get in return, which is the opposite of what ideal motherhood is, of course. There's nothing. It's hard to imagine something more selfless than deciding to have a child when there's a measurable risk that you'll die in childbirth. Of course, that's been massively mitigated in the modern world, but it will return. So, and then there's no appreciation for masculinity. That's a quality that these ladies have. They see men as tyrannical, misogynistic. I'd rather be with a bear than a man. Those kinds of people, they're devouring mothers. And so it's interesting that not to get into too much of a sidetrack here, but in the modern shift away from motherhood, there are devouring mothers who don't even have kids, right? It's still the same cluster of attitudes. It's just you could go through, and I'm not going to do that in this presentation, but you could go through and modify these symptoms and describe what they would look like for a lady that doesn't have kids. This is all over society today, okay? So if you pick a random woman today, I would go as far as to say it's greater than 50%. If you pick a random woman today who is a mother, odds are that she is a devouring mother. So this is something that people should be on the lookout for and address. But I've taken a different tack in talking about these sorts of things, and you'll find a presentation, for example, that talks about how modern men have created monsters out of their wives. And so I won't go through and address that here, but I'm going through this approach in order to set the stage to talk about what the male version of this is, okay? But before we get there, we need to talk about where they come from. Male devouring mothers are most commonly created by their wives. So we talked in another presentation about men making monsters out of their wives. This is the inverse. This is how devouring mothers create male versions of devouring mothers in their husbands. And I'm just going to briefly go through this, but you could go back and relook at reconsider the bullets of what describes a devouring mother. But you can trace them into the qualities of a male devouring mother. But what happens when a man has no quality time with his wife because she fills her whole schedule with her kids? She doesn't put her husband first, which is what a woman should do, what a wife should do. Okay? Well, without that quality time, that guy is going to have needs that are unmet, emotional needs, right? He didn't marry you just to have a nanny. He married you because he liked you. He liked spending time with you. He wanted you to be the person that he spends the best and the most time with, right? And if all he's getting is the leftovers after the kids go to bed, that's probably not going to make him very happy. Just as the inverse is true and reasonable. If the only time you as a man you spend with your wife, the only quality time you spend is after the kids go to bed, you're doing something wrong, right? So, and she'd have every right to be upset about that. Another thing that causes this is insufficient respect or appreciation from the spouse. And so if a wife is a devouring mother, she is just going to see the husband as constantly paying penance for his original sin of being a man, right? Because remember, they see them as tyrants and misogynists and everything else. And as an outgrowth of this, she's going to have this incessant dissatisfaction no matter what he does. Oh, all he does is give me a life where I'm amongst the most wealthy who ever lived. Okay? All he does is pay the bills. Okay, right? Do you know how few women have ever been in a situation where they've had to pay the price of a modern lifestyle? The closest they get, for the most part, is having had roommates in college, where they were living a very low standard of living in the first place, but it's also shared amongst a bunch of other people. And so it's not uncommon for women to have absolutely no clue what it takes a man to provide an income that's capable of supporting a family, because she never earned one. Even women who work full time, on average, they make far less than men do on average. And they make way less than successful men make. And I define successful man there as someone with the capability of supporting a wife and kids. So it's really ridiculous when you hear things like, oh, my husband comes home and he doesn't help out around the house. Yeah, he's working full time, lady. Oh, but I have a job too, because these kids, and, I saw a video the other day, and it was a lady with 11 kids, and it was a video of her routine of making the kids breakfast and lunch, and then she shipped them off to school. And I was like, wow, if you take all the things she does in a day for her kids, it's less than what a minimum wage worker at Chipotle does in an hour. For minimum wage for an hour. And she thinks that the equivalent of that, even in this extreme example with 11 kids, she thinks that that's equal to what her husband's doing at work, who somehow paid for 11 kids and her ability to stay at home while she sends her kids to public school. Come on, right? And we need to start calling these things out because it's ridiculous. All right. It has far-reaching consequences that you'll see if, as your eyes open, you see the effect of not calling out silly things. Anyway, so this attitude of what have you done for me today? Because they'll just offset your contributions with things that aren't actually equivalent that they do, things that are much more meager. Okay? And you just have to constantly pump them up with things in order for them to be happy or appreciative, because everything else you give them as a baseline isn't enough. And then another symptom of this is you'll see that the second your back is turned as a husband, they'll go off and do things that they know you don't want them to do. And I'm not saying that women should, live in fear of their husbands per se. What I'm saying is husbands and wives should work together to formulate the purpose of their family and create a life plan. I talk about this in Joy on Purpose on the individual level. Create a life plan for their family. Define their priorities. Define what they want and why and how they're going to get it. And know the second one of those spouses turns their back or is off on their own, no, they should not be acting contrary to that. Right? So many men, it's their household descends into Lord of the Flies or the island of Dr. Moreau the second they go to work, or if they have to go on a business trip. They come home and they have to reinstitute order from the chaos that the wife has turned the house into. And that's not right, okay? A husband and wife should work together to find the purpose of the family, and they should both stick to it, even if the other one's not watching them. And this is a symptom of a devouring mother, and it creates the male version of the devouring father. This guy's at wit's end all the time because he has to spin all the plates. He's like Atlas with the world on his shoulders everywhere he goes. Instead of having a home that's a battery charging station where he's happy to be and he wishes he could be all the time, when he's at work, he wishes he was at home, and when he's home, he wishes he was at work, because there isn't a place on God's green earth where he is actually appreciated and can feel at peace. And this creates huge problems. Okay, it's a breeding ground for bad things, and we're about to get to that. And finally, and this is a big one, the wife never initiates sex. She's not really into it. She withholds it when she's mad. She gets mad all the time. It's not good. She acts like she's doing a favor having sex with her husband, right? She acts like it's this reward for him. Okay? That these things are not good. And they create an environment where it's easier for a man to become a male devouring mother. Of course, it's always a choice. I'm just highlighting the environment that makes it easier. All right, so let's talk about what it is and why it's so dangerous. This is the male version of the devouring mother. So the devouring mother, the normal one, the female one, it's something that's mostly levied at her sons. Well, guess what? The male version of devouring mother is mostly levied at his daughters. So how does this look? Well, what this is about is the man pumping up his daughters, pumping up their egos in hopes to get something in return. Remember, the female version of this is the same in the sense that she acts towards her children in ways designed to maximize how good they make her feel. It's the same thing. It's what the father does to his daughter to make him feel good, okay, in the way that she treats him. So he's not getting compliments and respect from his wife, so he tries to live put this mask on and pump up his daughter so that she thinks he's the best man in the world and tells him so. And then that fulfills his need for female attention and approval. That's an emotional need that men have. And so how is he going to do this? It's just a machine it's like pumping air into a tire or putting a card into an ATM, right? He love bombs his daughter in order to get the reciprocated attention that he wants. He'll do this through gifts. He'll do this through activities. He'll do this through praise. Okay? So gifts, he gives her money, gives her a nice cell phone, gives her car. Activities. He takes her on trips or sends her on trips. He spends time with her. And all of these things are good if they're true and measured. But all of these things in the devouring mother, the male devouring mother, they're all over the top. And that's the motive is for him to get something out of it. Not to give, but to get. And so, and praise, Okay, so what are things that fit into this category? Let's get specific with some examples. He puts her in after school activities. They're expensive and he'll make up some excuse for it. But the real reason is so that she says, oh, my dad's so awesome. He loves me so much. He put me into this class, or, I get to ride horses, or whatever. He'll spend time with her, excessive time. Oh, every Sunday, my dad goes on a walk with me for 2 hours, and we just talk about life. Meanwhile, that whole walk, he's telling her how awesome she is. You're such a beautiful young lady. You're so smart. You're so gifted. You're just the best. Oh, a guy would be lucky to have you. Pump up, pump up, pump up. Okay? Now, if a girl's a high quality is on the track to become a high quality woman, she's doing things right in her life, if she's particularly smart, or she is particularly beautiful, or whatever the case may be, there's nothing wrong with stating the facts, okay? But in all of these things, and we're getting ahead now to how to prevent this, you need to put yourself in the place of that poor young man who has to marry your daughter. And why is he a poor young man? Because you're creating a little monster. You're creating a little monster who's going to think that she's God's gift to the world. And in everything you do, you need to ask yourself, how is her husband going to measure up to what I'm doing? Let's say that you're particularly successful financially. And this is against the backdrop of it becoming harder and harder for these young men to compete in the modern world. And to not just compete, but being successful today is not nearly as good as being successful 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago. Okay? You make a lot of money, you've got a nice house, you've got cars, you've got this, that, and the other. That guy's going to have none of those things. And maybe he'll edge into it a little. But odds are, the more successful you are as a man today, the less likely it is that your children or the people they marry will be anywhere close to that. And so you're setting them up for a lifetime of misery by spoiling them. You really need to cut back on how much of your money you spend on your kids, if you have money to spend on your kids. Okay? And I know a lot of people out there just fighting to make it. I'm not talking about you. Okay? So, you go on a 2-hour walk with your daughter every week. Yeah, that's great. It might make you feel good as a dad, but guess what? Her husband's not going to be able to do that. Okay? In all likelihood. And maybe that one's on the fence for you and say, well, he should. Okay. Well, what about something stupid like, I write my daughter a letter every single week and put her on her pillow every Sunday morning. And the whole letter's just how awesome she is and how lucky I am to be her father. Okay. Now we get back to keep it real. The problem with that is only a liar can do that. Only a liar can write a long letter, a love letter, essentially, which is obviously on the edge of inappropriate with your daughter anyway. I mean, obviously it's not going to be romantic love letter. Hopefully, good grief. But you're just praising her for like page after page every single freaking week. I don't care who you are. You can be Mother Teresa. You don't deserve that kind of praise. Okay? No human does. Not that much, right? What is she possibly going to do in a week that every week, week after week, that deserves that kind of attention? You're creating a monster. And so then when she gets married, she's going to be all sad and mopey because, my husband doesn't love me. I feel so terrible and unappreciated in this marriage. Yeah, that's because your dad lied to you for like 10 years straight every week to pump you up and say all these things that weren't true because he was just saying them so that a percentage of them would filter back to him. Don't do this to your freaking kids. Don't do this to their future spouses. So when you do this, all the gifts, all the activities, all the praise, if you have a young lady, say she's in high school, and say she's got, I don't know, what could she do after? Daddy gave her a car, so she's driving to school. She's never going to appreciate her husband giving her a car. It's just a given. Well, geez, I had this as a young lady. Why would this matter? Okay, Dad pays for gas. Dad pays for insurance. Okay, she goes to school. She after school, she goes to some after school thing that she's in that costs extra money. Let's say it's some sport. Let's say field hockey. Okay, just for the sake of it. So she goes and plays field hockey for 2 hours or whatever. Guess what? She can't do that as a wife and a mother. She's going to see that as a downgrade because you've trained her to associate fun with and exercise with field hockey. And she's probably going to get fat because you're not training her to find workout, to associate working out with something she can do at home. So she's going to say, oh, well, yeah, I played field hockey. I can't do that anymore. And now I'm just going to be fat. Okay, so she plays field hockey. Can't do anything like that as a wife and a mother every day, or at least 5 days a week. I guess they do it on weekends too. So she's going to feel all depressed about that, right? You bought her $1,000 cell phone, so she's not going to appreciate the fact that her husband can pay her phone bill, right? And what does she do with it? She's on social media all day, getting like 5 bajillion likes over her filtered pictures and fake stuff. Okay. How's that going to translate to her married life? You see the problem? And then, she's going on these summer trips to Europe. Good grief. That's something that like successful retired people do, not 16-year-old girls. Okay? You're creating a monster and you don't even see it. Why are you setting your daughters up to regret the rest of her life, to live the rest of her life looking in the rearview mirror and longing for the good times, which weren't good? And that's the main point here, is that it's not good. These things are not good. They're little dopamine hits. They're not meaningful things like raising a kid or having the greatest friend in the world in your spouse. Those are much, much better. You see? So this is guaranteed misery for your daughter, for her husband, and for her children. She's going to resent marriage and kids. Guaranteed. I guarantee it. Okay? Now, all of these things, they're not hypotheticals. You can look around and see them. Pay attention. They're there. Okay? In fact, I'd say this has been going on for long enough that most of the men I know who have, it's worse than less than ideal, who have regrettable marriages. Okay, let me back up a half a step. Most of the men I know regret the woman they married. That's very sad, but it's true. And most of the men I know married a woman who was raised by a male devouring father. This pattern has been going on for more than one generation. Okay? And it gets worse with each iteration. So break the cycle in your own family. If you're a man and you're married, odds are you're married to a devouring mother who was raised by a male devouring mother and a devouring mother as a mother. Check the receipts. What do you think? All right, so here's my invitation to you. Train your daughters to be better women than your wife. Don't succumb to the temptation of making up for your wife's faults through emotionally abusing your daughter, because that's actually what you're doing. Okay? What you're doing is actually not different than if you were a heroin addict and you were getting your daughter high too. This is a vice, and you're making up for these unfortunate situations you're in by sacrificing your daughter for your own short-term pleasure. And that's not cool at all. It's very bad. So instead, rise up, be a man, break the cycle. Don't oversaturate your daughters, whether it be with money, time, attention, adventures. Always do what's for their greatest long-term benefit. Don't put yourself in front of them. Put them first. That will create the greatest long-term joy in you. So instead of at the end of your life looking back and seeing the cascading destruction of the fact that you put your daughter on the altar of your own emotional needs, you will see that your life has been full of sacrifice on behalf of them. And you'll see the cascading effects of that, because she'll never have to deal with the nonsense that you had to deal with. She'll have a better life than you did, and a better life than her mom did, probably. If you see faults in your daughter, don't whitewash them. Don't tell her she's God's gift to the world. It's your job as her dad to prepare her for marriage. It's your job as a dad to make her husband's life as good as it can be through training her on how to be a good woman. If you married a devouring mother, all the more reason for you to take up that cross and get the job done, because she's not going to do it. You're going to be fighting that the whole time. So fight the fight. You do this by selecting the activities that you involve her in, helping her learn the skills, and creating the habits that directly transfer to being a wife and a mother. So, when she's picking up hobbies, or you're thinking about Christmas gifts or whatever, you're thinking about the activities you do want her to get into. Ask that question. How is this going to make her a better wife and mother? If the answer is it won't, don't do it, right? Don't do it. Pick something that will, because there are options. So I invite you to think about these things, because this is an enormous problem. And like I said, it's extremely common in Christian families.